How to write religions in your world building. Welcome to Worldbuilding Mastery, where I'm to teach you everything I know about world building. No AI is used on this channel. Today I will go over religion and how to write it in your world building. We'll be covering what religion is, why it matters, how to start creating one for your setting, and how religions influence everything. This will help you to craft religions in your setting in a way which will really sell their believability, and which will avoid a lot of the common tropes and pitfalls that writers sometimes fall into. Religion is one of the most important and powerful world-building tools available to you, so it is important to use it wisely. Let's begin. Part 1. What is religion and why does it matter? Now, I just want to state up front that I'm not at all concerned with whatever your personal religious views are, or lack thereof, but if you want to use religion in your world building, then you do need to understand how religious people think, and how different kinds of religion can make people think differently. I think, at core, the problem with most fictional depictions of religion is just that they were written by, basically, atheists who don't understand religion. So regardless of what you personally do or don't believe, you have to understand religion in order to write it. You have to understand how religious people think. So I ask that you go into this with a high degree of empathy and understanding, because it can often be very hard to understand the differences here. It's almost like trying to understand aliens. So I'm going to give you a definition of religion, which isn't necessarily accurate outside of this context, but which will be useful from a world-building perspective, and it's this. Religion is whatever the core of an individual or society's worldview is, and it is whatever they derive meaning and value from. I emphasize this definition because this is not limited to things that are strictly religions in the classic sense. So it could be an ideology or some other force, but the idea is that it's a framework through which people assess the world. So by this definition, pretty much everyone has a religion of some kind, unless they're a complete nihilist, which almost doesn't exist, because then nihilism is kind of religion, but yeah, everyone has a religion of some kind, everyone worships something. The definition of worship is actually to derive your meaning from something. You worship something by deriving meaning from it. So if you derive meaning from scientific inquiry, or from ideological convictions, in this sense that is worship, and those are religions. So again, this definition isn't meant to be universally applicable, but it's just useful in this context to think about things aren't necessarily what you'd immediately think of as a religion. The importance of religion, then, should be very apparent. It is how people derive meaning for themselves and for society, and how they come to some kind of universal understanding of the world they live in. This is important because how people understand the world and what things they value the most will define what actions they take, which will shape everything about your setting's history, culture, politics, technology, and everything else. This is why I emphasize religion as one of the most important aspects of world building, as so much else is just derived from it, and you can't truly understand your setting without understanding how people within it would think and act. You really need a high degree of empathy, like I say, to be able to, just kind of step outside of your own worldview and just imagine how someone with a totally different perspective on reality might think. You can't really design a culture without understanding their religion. Part 2. How to start designing a religion. So when you start the process of designing a fictional religion for your setting, you need to think about what it is that is being worshipped, i.e. what people are deriving meaning and value from, and how they derive that meaning, and what they can logically extrapolate from those values. So this includes big stuff like, metaphysics, morality, etc., but it also includes smaller things as well. The caliber of task which you are undertaking here is absolutely immense, designing a whole religion for your setting. But honestly, you're a world builder. You're not one to shy away from big tasks like that, so yeah. You probably already have a generalized idea for what kind of religion you're trying to create. Maybe it's a secretive cult that's worshipping some kind of dark eldritch being, or maybe it's a benign, forward-facing institution which most of society is organized around. Maybe it's like a Jedi-style order of monks who just mostly keep to themselves and help the world in small ways. You probably have a vague idea of what the religion is like, and maybe some of their core beliefs. I'm going to give you a framework that will help you to extrapolate that into a much clearer understanding of their religion. To give you an example of what I mean, think about the scientific method. So bear with me on this, but the scientific method is something that has no doubt had a profound influence on the world, but underpinning it are specific metaphysical assumptions which were brought about by religion. The scientific method supposes that the same input will always lead to the same output, that the universe is kind of rational and coherent, and that everything happens for a reason. So, causality, rational universe, these are never proven scientifically because they are the prerequisites of science. They are ultimately derived from theology. Medieval scribes debated over whether or not it made sense, whether it made sense to ignore the immaterial world, as it was ultimately just under God's power and he could change it at a whim, or whether it made sense to get to know God by studying his works, and to believe that the universe which he created was orderly and governed by rules. And they ultimately did settle upon the latter, which is how we now have the scientific method. Of course, I'm summarizing a lot here. I'm really oversimplifying history, but I think the point is clear. Many of the things that we take for granted today are ultimately derived from religious beliefs. So, like I say, you need a lot of empathy to really step outside of your own worldview, even if you yourself are not religious. So, it's commonly said that religions seek to explain three things, which are how did the universe come to be, what happens after we die, and how should we act towards one another. To be honest, these questions are not nearly as important as you might think. Maybe they're important to your religion, but they easily as well might not be. So, which things are emphasized by which religions will depend highly on the nature of that religion. So, I'm going to throw a lot more questions at you, just to give you some food for thought, and you're completely free to make your religion in a way which answers whichever of these you think are necessary, perhaps even none of them, if that's what you're doing. But I'd recommend answering at least a few of these. So, here goes. How did the universe come to be? How did humanity come to be? What is the nature of good and evil? Why is this world filled with suffering? Is there anything that comes after this life? Are good people rewarded and bad people punished for the actions they take in this life? Do we have free will? Is reality of a single nature or a multifaceted nature? Is the universe predictable and orderly, or chaotic and unpredictable? I could probably think of more questions, but I think that's a good starting point. Just think about those questions and how your religion might answer some of them, and you'll be off to a good start. Ultimately, there's only one question which I think every religion does kind of need to answer, and it is this one, which is, what is the most important thing? That, in the most simple terms I can possibly explain it, is the most important question to answer. If you can write an answer to that, and perhaps some of the other questions, like I say, then you have started to design a religion. Part 3. How religion works. Now, something that I think is worth bearing in mind is that while we tend to think about things in terms of religions, as distinct creeds with clear boundaries around them, in reality this often has not been the case. People's beliefs tend to be highly variable, fluid, and sometimes blurry, and it isn't always clear where one religion ends and another begins. When the Romans encountered pagan tribes, they regarded the gods worshipped by those tribes to be just as real as the ones that they themselves worshipped. Which is quite an alien concept to us today, but to the historical worldview it did actually make sense. And this is why they were content to allow the denizens of their empire to worship whichever gods they pleased, so long as they also revered the gods of Rome. It is primarily, although by no means exclusively, the Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam which have cultivated this view of religions as distinct, coherent forces with clear boundaries. But that is by no means the only valid approach of thinking about religion. A lot of the time when people talk about religions, they are talking about creeds. Religion does not necessarily take the form of creed, like an organized religion. There is such a thing as disorganized religion. So it can just be like a personal tradition or a way in which people have of like connecting to something greater than themselves, which isn't necessarily a creed. If you're watching this video though, you probably are trying to design a creed, but it's worth bearing in mind that you can have like multiple creeds under one religion, or vice versa, or you can have no creed at all. Now, if you are designing a creed, it can be useful to come up with like a list of tenets or principles which define the basis of a religion, like the 5 pillars of Islam as an example. But like all things, this isn't strictly a necessity. You don't have to have a strict list, but it can be useful. Lists are especially common in times and places where writing has been uncommon and things had to be passed down through memory or like oral tradition. It's possible to just have a sacred text or something which just cannot be summarized into a concise list. Lists are useful for world building though, so feel free to come up with one. One thing that I do think is often overlooked regarding religion though is that beliefs need to be justified. It might sound kind of strange to say this, but religious beliefs are analyzed and criticized and reviewed by scholars just as rigorously as like scientific ones are. At least that has often been the case historically. There have often been long back and forth debates between philosophers and theologians over abstract topics, and sometimes wars are fought over these, in an attempt to find the truth. Most people don't just take the beliefs of their religion as like blind dogma to be accepted without evidence. They take some kind of evidence along with it that justifies their beliefs. So think about what evidence exists in your setting for why people believe the religion which they follow, because it isn't arbitrary. They do believe things for reasons. So perhaps the gods that they worship were, they're actually real and they took active roles in shaping the world historically. Perhaps there was some great event that took place in the past which started the religion. Or perhaps there are certain religious artifacts which are occasionally uncovered which kind of point towards a wider narrative that they're slowly constructing over time. So think about what evidence they have for the religion. So, part 4. How religions influence everything. Somehow, you need to figure out how all of these abstract metaphysical beliefs and mythologies and stories and tenets and everything, all contained within or associated with your religion, will manifest in real-world behaviors, because that's how your religion will behave. So, for example, if you have a group of people which believes that our world is fundamentally fallen and corrupt and irredeemable, that they believe our only hope is to escape to some higher realm through prolonged meditation, that group is not going to do much besides just sitting and meditating, even as the world falls apart around them. But alternatively, religious convictions could inspire greater courage and action-taking than like almost anything else. So like a warrior who believes that he will enter heaven or Valhalla or whatever if he dies honorably in battle, he's probably going to fight harder and braver than one who believes that death is the end of everything. So as I say, religion decides what people value most highly and how they understand the world around that. It has a profound influence on everything, on what actions people will and won't take, and this will influence their culture, and thus their politics, economy, military, technology, and so on. I might make a whole video about culture, but that could kind of be part 2, because, to be honest, this video is getting a bit long, I think, but I'm kind of running out of time. So I might actually make a part 2 about the subject if people are interested in that. Religion is obviously a very big subject and much bigger than I can cover in one video. And this video has mostly been about what religion is, why it matters, and giving you some food for thought on how to start creating one. If there's enough interest, I will make more videos about other aspects of this subject. How religion influences culture, how it influences politics, etc. So let me know if you'd be interested in that. This video has been part of a series I've been doing on how to world build. If it has been helpful to you, then do go ahead and check out the rest of this series, because the advice I give in my other videos is just as good. If you're even more committed to improving your world building, then in the description below you can find a link to my paid community, where there are greater resources than I can offer you here. The mission statement of World Building Mastery is to create the greatest community of world builders and writers on the internet, from whom the greatest artists of our generation will be born. If you want to be part of that, that's the place to go. In any case, thanks for watching, and I'll have more content come soon. Bye!